London, 1845. The scissors moved with practiced precision, their soft snipping sound barely audible above the distant rumble of carriages outside the cramped workroom. Florence Caldwell leaned closer to the fabric, her eyes straining in the dim light that filtered through the soot-smeared window. Her shoulders ached from hunching over her work since dawn, but she paid the pain no mind. Pain was a familiar companion, hunger, a more unwelcome one. "Miss Caldwell, the Duke of Grantham's valet is here again," Mrs. Winters announced, her voice laced with the same awe she'd displayed when the first request had come 3 weeks prior. Florence carefully set down her scissors, brushing loose threads from her plain brown dress before standing. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. I'll attend to him directly." The dressmaking shop was modest but respectable, tucked away on a narrow street not frequented by the upper classes, which made the presence of a ducal servant all the more remarkable. Mr. Phillips, the valet, stood rigidly by the counter, a garment wrapped in tissue paper held delicately in his gloved hands. His expression betrayed nothing as Florence approached. "His Grace requires another repair," he stated simply, placing the package on the counter with reverence. "The left sleeve has torn at the shoulder seam. His Grace specifically requested your attention to the matter, as your previous work proved most satisfactory." Florence's fingers trembled slightly as she unwrapped the garment. It was a gentleman's evening coat of the finest midnight blue wool, with subtle silk embroidery at the lapels. Such an item would have cost more than she earned in 3 months. "I shall have it ready by tomorrow afternoon," she promised. "His Grace would prefer this evening, if at all possible," the valet replied, his tone making it clear this was not a request but an expectation. Florence hesitated. There were 3 bridesmaids' dresses promised to Lady Pembroke by morning, and she had barely started on the 2nd. But one did not refuse a duke. "Very well. I shall deliver it myself by 8 o'clock." The valet nodded approvingly. "The Duke will be pleased. Good day, Miss Caldwell." After he departed, Mrs. Winters rushed over, her plump face flushed with excitement. "The Duke of Grantham? Again? Do you know what they say about him in the gossip papers?" Florence bent her head to examine the tear, using it as an excuse to hide her face. "I make it a point not to indulge in such reading, Mrs. Winters. They say he hasn't been seen at any social function since his wife died in childbirth 3 years ago. Lives like a hermit in that grand house on Berkeley Square. They call him the Ghost Duke." Mrs. Winters lowered her voice to a whisper. "Some say he's gone mad with grief." "Gossip is rarely kind or accurate," Florence replied, selecting a thread that perfectly matched the coat's rich hue. "And I've no interest in anything but ensuring this repair is invisible to the eye." Yet as she worked, her mind wandered to the mysterious Duke who had, for some inexplicable reason, singled out her humble establishment for his patronage. 3 times now, his garments had arrived with minor damages that any competent valet could have addressed. It was peculiar, to say the least. The Berkeley Square mansion loomed before her, its windows mostly dark despite the early evening hour. Florence clutched the wrapped package to her chest, summoning her courage before ascending the steps to the servants' entrance. Before she could knock, the door swung open. "Miss Caldwell," Mr. Phillips greeted her with a slight bow. "Please, follow me." To her surprise, instead of taking the package, he led her through the servants' corridors and up a narrow staircase. "His Grace wishes to thank you personally for your prompt service," the valet explained, noting her confusion. Florence's heart hammered against her ribs. Meeting a duke? Her plain brown dress and worn pelisse were hardly suitable for such an encounter. But before she could voice her objections, Phillips was knocking on a heavy oak door. "Enter," came a deep voice from within. The study was warm and dimly lit, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive desk before the windows. A fire crackled in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the room. At first, Florence didn't see him, then a tall figure emerged from the shadows near the fireplace. "Your Grace, Miss Caldwell has delivered your coat," Phillips announced before bowing and discreetly withdrawing, closing the door behind him. The Duke of Grantham stood before her, his face half illuminated by firelight. Younger than she had expected, perhaps 35, with striking features that might have been handsome were they not set in such a severe expression. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and his eyes, deep-set and watchful, studied her with unsettling intensity. "Miss Caldwell," he said, his voice cultured and measured. "I appreciate your haste." Florence dropped into a curtsy, keeping her gaze lowered. "It was no trouble, Your Grace. May I see your work?" She unwrapped the package with fingers that suddenly felt clumsy and presented the coat for his inspection. The Duke approached, taking the garment from her hands. Their fingers brushed momentarily, and Florence felt an unexpected jolt at the brief contact. He examined the repair with meticulous care, running his thumb over the stitches. "Remarkable," he murmured. "One cannot tell it was ever damaged." "Thank you, Your Grace." Florence kept her tone professional despite the warmth spreading through her cheeks. "Do you know why I requested you specifically, Miss Caldwell?" The question caught her off guard. "I assumed Your Grace was satisfied with my previous work." "Indeed." He set the coat aside carefully. "But there is more to it than that. 3 months ago, I attended a rare social obligation, Lady Harrington's musical evening. I observed a young woman in a modest green dress that caught my attention. Not for its extravagance, but for its exceptional craftsmanship." Florence's breath caught. The green dress had been her own design, painstakingly created from remnants she'd purchased with her meager savings. She had worn it only once, to accompany Mrs. Winters to Lady Harrington's musical soirée, where they had been permitted to stand at the back of the room as a favor to Mrs. Winters' cousin, who was Lady Harrington's housekeeper. Upon inquiry, the Duke continued, "I discovered the dress was not only designed but sewn by the wearer herself, a young woman employed at a modest dressmaker's shop." "You, Miss Caldwell." "Your Grace, I'm flattered by your notice, but I have a proposition for you," he interrupted, moving to his desk and retrieving a folded document. "I require a personal seamstress for my household. Someone with exceptional skill and discretion. The position includes room and board, plus a generous salary." Florence stared at him in stunned silence. "Your Grace, I'm employed by Mrs. Winters. I have already spoken with Mrs. Winters. She has agreed to release you from your obligations, in exchange for my patronage of her establishment." Indignation flared within her. "You discuss my future employment without consulting me first." A flash of surprise crossed the Duke's face, quickly replaced by his usual impassive expression. "I apologize if my actions seem presumptuous. In my position, one becomes accustomed to matters proceeding according to one's wishes, even when those matters involve other people's lives." The words escaped before Florence could restrain them, and she immediately regretted her boldness. To her astonishment, the Duke's mouth curved in what might almost have been a smile. "Especially then, Miss Caldwell. However, you are quite right to reprimand me. Will you at least consider my offer?" Florence hesitated. The salary he named was 3 times her current earnings. It would mean security, comfort, perhaps even the possibility of sending money to her ailing mother in the countryside. Yet something in his intense gaze unsettled her. "May I inquire as to why Your Grace requires a personal seamstress? Surely there are establishments in London better equipped to serve your needs." The Duke turned toward the fire, his profile sharp against the golden light. "My daughter," he said quietly. "Sophia. She is 3 years old and has never known her mother. I have kept her secluded from society, but she is growing quickly. She requires proper attire, and I wish for her garments to be created with care, by someone who might take an interest in her as more than simply the daughter of a duke." The vulnerability in his voice was so unexpected, so at odds with his commanding presence, that Florence found herself momentarily speechless. "I understand, Your Grace," she finally replied. "I would be honored to accept the position." The East Wing nursery was a revelation. Flooded with light from tall windows, it contained every luxury a child could desire, beautifully crafted toys, miniature furniture, and shelves filled with books. Yet there was something sterile about the perfection, as if the room were more a showcase than a place where a child truly lived. "Miss Caldwell, this is Lady Sophia," the nursemaid announced, ushering forward a small figure who had been sitting quietly by the window. The child who approached was tiny for her age, with delicate features and solemn brown eyes that seemed too old for her young face. Her dark hair was neatly braided, and she wore a perfectly proper white dress with blue ribbons. She executed a flawless curtsy. "How do you do, Miss Caldwell?" she said, her voice soft but clear. Florence's heart constricted at the formal behavior of this too serious child. She knelt to the girl's level, smiling warmly. "I'm very pleased to meet you, Lady Sophia. I've come to make some new dresses for you." Sophia regarded her thoughtfully. "Will they have pockets? Would you like them to have pockets?" The child's eyes widened slightly, as if the concept of her preferences being considered was novel. "Yes, please. For collecting treasures. Then pockets you shall have. Deep ones, with perhaps a special hidden one for your most precious finds." Something flickered in Sophia's solemn expression, a glimpse of the child beneath the carefully constructed facade. "Father says I'm not to bring outdoor things inside. It's not proper." Florence leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Well, perhaps we might design a special apron with pockets that can be removed before coming indoors. That way, your treasures can be properly stored outside, and your father's rules respected." A tiny smile curved Sophia's lips. "You're very clever, Miss Caldwell. As are you, my lady. Now, shall we look at some fabric samples? I brought several I thought might suit you." Over the next hour, Florence was pleased to see Sophia gradually relaxing, showing genuine excitement over the colorful fabrics and trimmings. The child had definite opinions, once given permission to express them, and a surprisingly refined aesthetic sense for one so young. They were deep in discussion about the merits of ribbon versus lace when a shadow fell across their work. Florence looked up to find the Duke standing in the doorway, watching them with an unreadable expression. "Father!" Sophia immediately straightened, the animation draining from her face as she resumed her perfect posture. "Your Grace," Florence acknowledged, rising from her kneeling position. "I see you two are becoming acquainted," he observed, his gaze moving between them. "Miss Caldwell is making me a dress with pockets," Sophia announced, then quickly added, "for handkerchiefs and gloves, of course." The Duke arched an eyebrow. "Indeed? How practical." "Your daughter has excellent taste, Your Grace," Florence said. "She favors blue, which complements her complexion beautifully." "Like her mother," he murmured, almost to himself. Then, more clearly, "I trust you have everything you require, Miss Caldwell." "Yes, Your Grace. The workroom you've provided is more than adequate." He nodded. "Excellent. Sophia, it's time for your lessons with Mr. Barnett." The child rose obediently, curtsied to Florence, and left with her nursemaid, casting one wistful glance back at the fabric samples still spread across the table. Once they were alone, the Duke's gaze returned to Florence. "You've made an impression on my daughter. She rarely speaks so freely with strangers. She's a delightful child, Your Grace. Very bright." "Yes." His expression softened momentarily. Her mother was the same. Quick-witted, observant. The vulnerability vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "I'll leave you to your work, Miss Caldwell." As he turned to go, Florence found herself calling after him. "Your Grace?" He paused, looking back at her questioningly. "Lady Sophia mentioned she enjoys collecting treasures outdoors. Perhaps she might benefit from nature walks with her nursemaid?" Children often learn much from observing the natural world. For a moment, the Duke looked as though he might rebuke her for her presumption. Then, surprisingly, he inclined his head slightly. "A reasonable suggestion. I shall consider it." With that, he was gone, leaving Florence to wonder at her own boldness. Twice now she had spoken more freely to him than was proper for someone of her station. Yet rather than taking offense, he had listened. It was puzzling, this strange Duke with his grief-haunted eyes and his too solemn daughter. The weeks passed swiftly as Florence settled into life at the Grantham mansion. Her workroom became a sanctuary, filled with sunlight, fine fabrics, and the quiet satisfaction of creation. She produced half a dozen new dresses for Sophia, each with its promised pockets, and several garments for the Duke as well. True to his word, the Duke had considered her suggestion. Sophia now took daily walks in the nearby park with her nursemaid, returning with rosy cheeks and eager to show Florence her discoveries, unusual leaves, interesting pebbles, occasionally a feather. These treasures were dutifully stored in a special wooden box that the Duke had unexpectedly provided for this purpose. Florence saw little of the Duke himself. He spent most days attending to business matters and most evenings secluded in his study. On the rare occasions their paths crossed, he was unfailingly polite but distant, asking after her work and his daughter's wardrobe needs with formal interest. Yet she sometimes felt his gaze following her when he thought she wouldn't notice, and there was something in those looks that made her heart beat faster in a most improper way. One evening, as she worked late to finish a new waistcoat for him, there was a knock at her workroom door. Expecting one of the servants, she called, "Enter," without looking up from her stitching. "You work too late, Miss Caldwell." Florence startled at the Duke's voice, pricking her finger with her needle. "Your Grace! I didn't expect, clearly." He stepped into the room, his tall figure imposing in the small space. He wore no jacket, just his shirt and waistcoat, as if he too had been working late. "You're injured." Florence quickly pressed her bleeding finger to her handkerchief. "It's nothing, truly." He crossed to her work table and, to her astonishment, took her hand in his, examining the tiny wound. "Even the most skilled hands are vulnerable to injury," he observed, his touch sending an inappropriate warmth through her. "It's an occupational hazard, Your Grace," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. He released her hand, his expression thoughtful. "You've transformed my daughter," he said abruptly. "She smiles now. Speaks of her day at dinner. Before you came, she was—" He hesitated. "After her mother died, Sophia withdrew. The nursemaids couldn't reach her. Nor could I." Florence's heart ached at the admission. "Children are resilient, Your Grace. Sometimes they simply need permission to be children." "Permission," he repeated, the word seeming to resonate with him. "Yes, perhaps that's it." He glanced at the waistcoat she'd been working on. "That's for me." "Yes, Your Grace. For the Harrington Ball next week. You have a remarkable eye for detail, Miss Caldwell." His gaze moved from the garment to her face. "I've received numerous compliments on my improved appearance since you joined the household." Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I merely enhance what is already there, Your Grace." The words hung between them, suddenly seeming far more personal than she had intended. "York," he said quietly. "I beg your pardon. My name. It's York. York Grantham. When we are alone, I should like to hear you say it." Florence's breath caught. This was dangerous territory. "That would be highly inappropriate, Your Grace." "Many things are inappropriate, Miss Caldwell. That doesn't make them wrong." He moved closer until she could smell the faint scent of sandalwood that clung to him. "For instance, it would be inappropriate for me to notice how your eyes change color depending on the light. Sometimes they're gray, sometimes almost blue. Your Grace, it would be inappropriate for me to admire the way you've brought warmth back into this cold house. The way you speak to me as a person, not a title." He was close enough now that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Most inappropriate of all would be for me to confess that I find myself thinking of you at the most inopportune moments." Florence knew she should step away, remind him of their respective positions, the impossibility of whatever he was suggesting. Instead, she heard herself say, "York." His name on her lips seemed to break something in him. With a sound like a suppressed groan, he raised his hand to her cheek, his touch feather-light. "Florence," he whispered, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was as surprised by his actions as she was. Then it deepened, becoming something urgent and needful that awakened sensations Florence had never experienced before. His arms encircled her, drawing her against the solid warmth of his body. reality intruded with the distant sound of footsteps in the corridor. They broke apart, both breathing heavily. The Duke of York took a step back, his expression a mixture of desire and regret. "Forgive me," he said hoarsely. "I should not have." "Please don't apologize," Florence interrupted, her voice unsteady. "Unless you regret it." "Regret?" He gave a short, incredulous laugh. "No, Florence. Regret is the one thing I don't feel at this moment." He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "But I have put you in an impossible position." "We both know this cannot be," she agreed softly. "The Duke of Grantham and a Seamstress? Society would never accept it." His expression hardened. "Society," he spat the word. "I've lived my life according to its expectations. Married the appropriate woman, produced an heir, maintained the family honor. And where has it left me? Alone, raising a daughter who barely knows how to smile." "You have responsibilities," Florence reminded him gently. "To your family name, to Sophia." "And what of my responsibility to myself? To my own happiness?" He took her hand, his grip almost desperate. "These past weeks, watching you with Sophia, seeing how you've brought life back into this house, into me, I've begun to question everything I once took for granted." Florence's heart pounded painfully. "What are you saying, York?" "I don't know," he admitted, releasing her hand and pacing the small room. "I only know that for the first time since Catherine died, I feel alive again. Because of you." The declaration hung between them, fraught with implications neither dared to fully acknowledge. "It's late," Florence finally said. "We should both retire." He nodded, visibly gathering his composure. "Of course. Forgive my intrusion." At the door, he paused, looking back at her with such naked longing that it stole her breath. "Good night, Florence." "Good night, Your Grace." The formal address was a deliberate reminder of the boundary they had momentarily crossed, and of why they must never cross it again. The Harrington ball arrived, bringing with it a flurry of activity as the Duke prepared to make his first significant social appearance in years. Florence spent the day helping Sophia dress for her own small dinner party in the nursery, carefully avoiding any interaction with the Duke himself. She had just finished reading Sophia a bedtime story when one of the maids appeared at the nursery door. "Miss Caldwell, His Grace requests your presence in his study immediately." Florence's pulse quickened. She had successfully avoided being alone with the Duke for 3 days. "Did he say why?" The maid shook her head. "Only that it was urgent, miss." With a sense of trepidation, Florence made her way to the study. She found the Duke fully dressed for the ball, resplendent in his evening clothes, including the waistcoat she had finished just the previous day. "You sent for me, Your Grace?" she asked, keeping her tone professionally detached. "Yes." He seemed agitated, pacing before the fireplace. "There's been a development. Lady Harrington has specifically requested your presence at the ball tonight." Florence stared at him. "I beg your pardon." "It seems Mrs. Winters has been boasting of her former employee now working for a duke. Word has spread about your exceptional skill. Lady Harrington remembers you from her musical evening and wishes to introduce you to several potential clients among her guests." "But I have nothing suitable to wear to such an event," Florence protested. A small smile touched his lips. "I anticipated that concern." He gestured to a large box resting on a side table. "Open it." With trembling fingers, Florence lifted the lid. Inside lay the most beautiful gown she had ever seen, deep blue silk with delicate silver embroidery at the bodice and hem. "I don't understand." "I commissioned it from Mrs. Winters, according to your measurements. She was most pleased to create something for her former protégé to wear in high society." Florence touched the fabric reverently. "It's exquisite, but I couldn't possibly accept. It's not a gift," he interrupted. "Consider it a business investment. The connections you make tonight could establish you as a sought-after modiste among the ton. Isn't that what you've worked toward?" She looked up at him, searching his face. "Is that truly why you're doing this?" His expression softened. "No," he admitted quietly. "In truth, I'm being terribly selfish. I simply want to see you dressed beautifully, moving among my peers, even if I must pretend you're merely my employee." The confession, so honest in its vulnerability, touched something deep within her. "Very well," she conceded. "But only as your employee, attending at Lady Harrington's request." "Of course." He gestured toward the door. "Elsie is waiting to help you prepare. The carriage leaves in 1 hour." The Harrington mansion blazed with light, every window illuminated as carriages disgorged elegantly dressed guests onto the sweeping drive. Florence sat across from the Duke in his grand carriage, her heart hammering with nerves. The gown fit perfectly, complemented by long white gloves and a simple silver necklace that Elsie had produced with a knowing smile. "You look beautiful," the Duke said softly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Though I suspect I shouldn't tell you so." "No," Florence agreed, though she couldn't help the pleased flush that warmed her cheeks. "You should not. Then I shall restrict myself to properly ducal observations. You are adequately attired for the occasion. Your deportment is sufficiently dignified. Lady Harrington will find no fault with my seamstress." Despite her nerves, Florence laughed. "How very proper of you, Your Grace." "I am nothing if not proper, Miss Caldwell." But his eyes told a different story as they lingered on her face. The carriage pulled to a stop, and reality reasserted itself. Florence took a deep breath. "How should I behave? I've never attended such an event except as a dressmaker's assistant." "Be yourself," he said simply. "Your natural grace and intelligence will serve you better than any affected mannerisms." The footman opened the door, and the Duke descended first, then turned to assist her. As her gloved hand touched his, he murmured, "Remember, no matter what happens in there, you have nothing to prove to these people. Your worth is not determined by their approval." The word steadied her, and she entered the mansion with her head high. Lady Harrington, a formidable matron with elaborate silver hair, intercepted them immediately. "Duke! How wonderful that you finally emerged from that mausoleum you call home." Her shrewd eyes assessed Florence. "And this must be the talented Miss Caldwell. Mrs. Winters has sung your praises most enthusiastically." "You're too kind, Lady Harrington," Florence replied with a polite curtsy. "Not at all. That gown speaks for itself. Your own work. The design is mine, though the execution was Mrs. Winters. Clever and modest. Come, there are several ladies who are most eager to meet you." Lady Harrington glanced at the Duke. "You don't mind if I steal her away, do you, Grantham?" Lady Pembroke is positively desperate for a new modiste who understands current fashions without being vulgar about it. The Duke inclined his head graciously, though Florence detected a certain tension in his jaw. "By all means. Miss Caldwell is here at your request, after all." Lady Harrington promptly swept Florence away into the crowd, introducing her to a succession of aristocratic ladies who examined her gown with appreciative eyes and inquired about her availability for commissions. Florence found herself engaged in detailed discussions of fabrics and designs, her initial nervousness fading as she spoke about the craft she loved. Throughout the evening, she was aware of the Duke's presence across the ballroom. Though surrounded by acquaintances eager to welcome him back to society, his gaze frequently sought hers, a private communication that sent warm currents through her despite the distance between them. During a brief respite from introductions, Florence found herself near an open terrace door, grateful for the cool night air. She had just taken a reviving sip of champagne when a cultured voice spoke beside her. "Miss Caldwell, is it not? The Duke of Grantham's seamstress." She turned to find an elegantly dressed gentleman regarding her with interest. His handsome face wore an expression of polite inquiry, but something in his eyes made her uneasy. "Yes, I am Miss Caldwell," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "Lord Everley," he introduced himself with a small bow. "I must say, you're causing quite a stir this evening. It's unusual for a servant to attend as a guest, no matter how skilled." Florence stiffened at his tone. I am here at Lady Harrington's specific invitation, my lord. Of course, of course. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Grantham always did have unconventional ideas about proper boundaries. Though I must say, he's outdone himself this time. I'm not sure I take your meaning, sir. Lord Everley leaned closer, lowering his voice. Come now, Miss Caldwell. A beautiful young woman, suddenly installed in a widower's household? Society may be willing to pretend your position is merely that of a seamstress, but we both know there are other services a man in Grantham's position might require. Heat flooded Florence's face, this time from outrage rather than pleasure. You insult both his grace and myself with such insinuations. Do I? Lord Everley's eyebrows rose. How interesting that you defend him so passionately. One might think you're overstepping, Everley, came the Duke's cold voice from behind them. Florence turned to find York standing there, his expression thunderous despite his outwardly calm demeanor. Lord Everley straightened, his smile turning brittle. Grantham. I was just becoming acquainted with your employee. So I heard. The Duke's tone could have frozen the Thames in midsummer. Miss Caldwell is indeed my employee, and a highly respected one. She is also under my protection. I trust one make myself clear. The threat underlying his words was unmistakable. Lord Everley's face hardened, but he offered a stiff bow. Perfectly clear. Do enjoy your evening. He retreated into the crowd, throwing one last speculative glance over his shoulder. Are you all right? The Duke asked quietly, once they were alone. Yes, merely startled by his presumption. Florence clutched her champagne glass tightly. Is that what everyone is thinking? That I am not everyone, he interrupted firmly. Everley has a reputation for malicious gossip. But yes, there will be speculation. I should have anticipated it. Perhaps I should leave. Running away would only confirm their worst suspicions. He offered his arm. Walk with me on the terrace. Just for a moment. The fresh air will help. Against her better judgment, Florence accepted his arm, allowing him to guide her through the open doors onto the deserted terrace. The night air was cool and fragrant with early summer blossoms from the garden below. They stood in silence for a moment, both gathering their composure. I'm sorry, he finally said. I didn't consider how your presence here might be misconstrued. It's not your fault. Florence gazed out at the darkened garden. Society always assumes the worst when boundaries of class are crossed, even innocently. He turned to face her, his expression grave in the moonlight. There is nothing innocent about my feelings for you, Florence. That's the problem. Everley sensed it, even if he misinterpreted the particulars. Her heart quickened at his candor. York, no, let me finish. He took both her hands in his. I've spent 3 years entombed in grief and duty. Then you came into my home with your quiet strength and gentle hands, bringing Sophia back to life, bringing me back to life. I find myself thinking of impossible things. Improper things. Such as, she whispered. Such as asking you to dance with me. Here, now, with no music but the night sounds. People would see. Yes. His thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her gloved hands. They would. The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility and danger. Then, slowly, deliberately, Florence placed one hand on his shoulder. One dance, she said softly. Just one. His arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer than was strictly proper. Slowly, they began to move together in the graceful patterns of a waltz, though no music played save the distant strains filtering through the open doors. His eyes never left hers as they turned beneath the stars, two figures moving in perfect harmony. This is madness, Florence murmured. Yes, he agreed, his voice low and intimate. The first sensible madness I've known in years. From the ballroom came the sound of surprised murmurs. Florence glanced over to see several guests had noticed them through the terrace doors, heads bent together in obvious gossip. We should stop, she said reluctantly. We should, he agreed, but made no move to release her. Instead, his arm tightened slightly around her waist. Florence, Your Grace. Lady Harrington's voice shattered the moment as she appeared at the terrace doors. I've been looking everywhere for you. Lady Worcester is most eager to renew your acquaintance. The Duke released Florence, though not before Lady Harrington had witnessed their improper proximity. The older woman's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline, but she merely said, Miss Caldwell, I believe Lady Pembroke was hoping to speak with you about a commission before she departs. Of course, Lady Harrington. Thank you. Florence glanced once more at the Duke, then hurried past him into the ballroom, feeling the weight of curious stares following her progress. For the remainder of the evening, she and the Duke maintained a careful distance from one another. Yet whenever their eyes met across the crowded room, the memory of their dance hung between them, an unspoken promise, or perhaps a warning. The ride home was silent, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. When they arrived at the mansion, the Duke escorted her to the base of the servants' staircase. I hope the evening was productive for you, despite complications, he said formally. Yes, Your Grace. I received several commissions. Florence kept her gaze lowered. Thank you for the opportunity. Florence. The single word, spoken softly, made her look up at him. We cannot continue this way. She nodded, her throat tight. I know. I shall tender my resignation in the morning. No. His vehemence startled her. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He glanced around to ensure they were alone, then stepped closer. I meant that I can no longer pretend that what I feel for you is appropriate for an employer to feel for his employee. I can no longer pretend that I don't think of you constantly, that I don't watch for glimpses of you throughout my day, that I don't find excuses to seek you out. York, she whispered, we both know there can be no future in this. The distance between our stations can be bridged, he interrupted. If we have the courage to try. Florence shook her head, pain tightening her chest. How? Would you make me your mistress? Hidden away, a shameful secret? I could not bear it. No. He took her hands, his grip fierce. Never that. You deserve honor, not shame. Respect, not secrecy. Then what? I don't know, he admitted. I only know that I cannot lose you. Not when I've just found you. A discreet cough from the top of the stairs made them spring apart. Mr. Phillips stood there, his expression carefully neutral. Will there be anything else tonight, Your Grace? No, Phillips. Thank you. The valet nodded and withdrew, but the interruption had broken the spell. Florence stepped back, gathering her composure. Good night, Your Grace. Florence, please, she whispered. Let me go. For now. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded, his expression shuttered once more. Good night, Miss Caldwell. The morning brought chaos. Florence woke to the sound of raised voices in the corridor outside her room. Hastily donning her robe, she opened her door to find several servants gathered around a maid who clutched a newspaper, her expression horrified. What's happened? Florence asked. The maid turned to her, eyes wide. Oh, Miss Caldwell. It's dreadful. She thrust the paper into Florence's hands. There, on the society page, was an illustration of two figures dancing on a moonlit terrace. Though the faces were not detailed, the male figure was clearly labeled the Ghost Duke and the female his Seamstress. The accompanying text was scathing. Society was agog last evening as the reclusive Duke of Grantham made his return to the social scene, accompanied by his personal Seamstress, a position that apparently entails more intimate duties than one might expect. The pair were observed in a clandestine waltz beneath the stars, far from the watchful eyes of the ballroom, though not, alas, from this reporter's vigilant gaze. One wonders what other skills beyond needlework have earned the young woman her place in the ducal household. The piece continued in the same vein, filled with innuendo and thinly veiled accusations. Florence felt the blood drain from her face. "His Grace has seen this?" she asked faintly. "Yes, miss," the maid replied. "He's in a terrible rage. Sent for his solicitor first thing." Florence closed her eyes briefly, then straightened her shoulders. "Thank you. I shall dress immediately." In her room, she moved mechanically, donning her simplest work dress, her mind racing. This changed everything. Whatever fragile possibility might have existed between her and the Duke had been shattered by this public scandal. Her reputation was in tatters, and his had been tarnished by association with her. There was only one honorable course of action. When she was dressed, she sat at her small desk and penned a brief letter of resignation, citing personal reasons for her departure. She would return to Mrs. Winters, who would surely take her back. Or perhaps she would go to her mother in the countryside, where the scandal might not follow her so quickly. She had just sealed the letter when there was a knock at her door. Mr. Phillips stood there, his usually impassive face grave. "His Grace requests your immediate presence in his study, Miss Caldwell." "Of course." Florence tucked the letter into her pocket and followed the valet, her steps heavy with dread. She found the Duke standing at the window, his back to the door, tension evident in every line of his posture. He turned as she entered, his face haggard, as if he hadn't slept. "You've seen the paper," he stated, rather than asked. "Yes, Your Grace. It's vile. Slanderous. My solicitor is preparing legal action against the publisher." Florence shook her head. "That will only draw more attention to the matter." "I will not allow your reputation to be destroyed by malicious gossip," he declared fiercely. "My reputation is of little consequence compared to yours, Your Grace. Or to Lady Sophia's." Florence withdrew the letter from her pocket. "I've prepared my resignation. It's for the best." He stared at the sealed letter, then back at her face. "The best," he repeated flatly. "For whom?" "For everyone concerned. My continued presence here would only fuel the scandal. And if I refuse to accept your resignation, then I would be forced to leave without your blessing, which I would greatly regret." The Duke crossed the room in 3 long strides, taking the letter from her hand and tossing it onto his desk unopened. "There is another solution," he said, his voice low and intense. Florence's heart jumped painfully. "Your Grace, York," he corrected her. "My name is York." "York," she whispered. "Please don't make this harder than it already is. Marry me." The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their simplicity. Florence stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What did you say?" "Marry me," he repeated, taking her hands in his. "Be my wife, Florence. Be Sophia's mother. Help me rebuild this house into a home." "You can't be serious," she breathed. "I'm a seamstress, the daughter of a country doctor." "You're a duke." "I'm a man," he countered, "who has found the woman he wants to spend his life with. Titles and social hierarchies be damned. Society would never accept it." "Society," he scoffed. "The same society that has already condemned us based on a dance? Let them talk. I've lived by their rules long enough." His grip on her hands tightened. "I married once for duty. Let me marry once for love." Florence's eyes filled with tears. "Love?" His expression softened, vulnerability replacing determination. "Yes, Florence. Love. I love you. I think I began to love you the first time you spoke to me as a person, not a title. I know I loved you when I saw you with Sophia, showing her that she was worthy of attention and affection." He released one of her hands to gently brush a tear from her cheek. "I love your skilled hands and your kind heart. I love your courage and your principles. I love you." The words she had never expected to hear from him, had scarcely dared to acknowledge even in her most secret thoughts, undid her completely. "York," she whispered, "I love you too. But is love enough to withstand what we would face?" "It can be," he said simply. "If we face it together." He drew her closer, one hand cupping her face with infinite tenderness. Florence Caldwell, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because of a scandal, not despite our differences, but because we have found in each other something worth fighting for. Florence looked into his eyes, seeing not the distant, grief-haunted man she had first met, but the man he had become in their time together, vulnerable, passionate, capable of great love. In that moment, the choice seemed not impossible but inevitable. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I will marry you." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a joy that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Thank you," he murmured, "for mending what I thought was broken beyond repair." "Your coat," she teased, her heart too full for solemnity. He laughed, the sound unfamiliar and wonderful. "My heart, Florence. You've mended my heart." A small voice from the doorway interrupted them. "Father." They turned to find Sophia standing there, her solemn eyes wide as she took in the sight of her father embracing the seamstress. York knelt down, holding out his hand to his daughter. "Sophia, come here, darling. I have something important to tell you." The child approached cautiously, her gaze moving between them. "Is Miss Caldwell leaving?" The maid said there was a scandal. "No, sweetheart," York said gently. "Quite the opposite. Miss Caldwell has agreed to marry me. She's going to be your new mother." Sophia's eyes widened further. "Truly?" she asked, looking up at Florence. Florence knelt beside York, bringing herself to the child's level. "Only if you approve, Lady Sophia. I would never wish to take your mother's place in your heart. But I would be honored to be a second mother to you, if you would allow it." For a long moment, Sophia regarded them thoughtfully, her young face serious beyond her years. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her features, not the cautious, polite smile Florence had seen before, but a real one, bright with genuine happiness. "I should like that very much," she declared, then added practicality, "will you still make dresses with pockets?" Florence laughed, tears of joy spilling onto her cheeks. "Always, my darling. The very best pockets for all your treasures." Sophia stepped forward and, to Florence's surprise, wrapped her small arms around her neck in a fierce hug. "Then I approve," she whispered. York's arms encircled them both, holding his future wife and his daughter in a protective embrace. Outside, the morning sun streamed through the study windows, illuminating the three figures as they knelt together on the carpet, no longer a duke, a seamstress, and a lonely child, but a family, bound together by threads stronger than silk and more enduring than any fabric, the threads of love, respect, and the promise of a future woven together, stitch by careful stitch.